I'm happy to be here this morning. I'm happy to get the opportunity to share and to do my best to follow what Todd did last week. Where Todd left off doing the last part of Acts chapter 21, and let me know last Sunday that I would be picking up right in chapter 22. So what I want to do first is just read through the passage that we're going to go over. So if you have a copy of the scripture with you, you can open it, Acts 22, and we're going to do verses 1 through 22. Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, and brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of the ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify. I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed all around me. I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you will be told all you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that moment I was able to see him. Then he said, The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all the people of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, wash your sins away, calling on his name. When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Lord, I replied, these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, Rid the earth of him. He is not fit to live. Big chunk of passage that will break down as best that we can. But last week, Todd did a really good job leading us up right to this scene. If you weren't here or didn't have time to listen yet to what Todd talked on, Paul was in the temple and got falsely accused of doing some things, and at this accusations, a riot broke out, and then he was whisked away by the Roman police, and now he's about to address the mob that would have killed him if he hadn't been pulled out of that fray by the officials. Last week, Todd taught us about handling pride, which I really appreciated, how we feel when we're accused of something, whether the things we're accused of are real and we just don't like the fact that somebody's bringing it to light, or if the things that we're being accused of are false and we feel even extra defensive because that didn't even happen. It made me think of this game that I've played a couple of times. Me and Emma go to my uncle's cabin with my sister Melissa and my brother-in-law Matthew, and we stay there for the weekend, and we bring a bunch of board games. And one of the last times we went, Matthew brought along a game called Chameleon. Don't know if anybody's heard of that. See a couple people. Yeah, it's infuriating. It's fun, but if you haven't played it, the whole concept of the game is that there's essentially a topic of conversation, and everyone in the group knows exactly what the topic is, except one. And the goal is you're all supposed to talk about it. The job of the chameleon is to blend into the conversation and be like, I know exactly what you're talking about, even though you don't. And the job of the group is to figure out, okay, who's pretending they know what we're talking about, who's the chameleon. The job of the chameleon is to blend in well enough that they don't get caught. Sounds like a fun concept. The four of us have never fought or come to blows. That's probably about as close as we've ever gotten. There is something when you're playing that game and you are the chameleon and the fingers are pointing at you, I think it's you. It's a game, but the defenses go up how dare you? I can't believe you would think that. It's definitely not me. It is. But you're taking it personal, you don't think I'm a good enough liar to blend into this? But on the flip side of that, when you're not the chameleon and the finger gets pointed at you, it's almost worse. Because you're sitting there, you're like, somebody in this group is lying to us, and you think it's me, but it's not me. But the more defensive I get, the more you think it is me, and I don't know. You should play if you haven't. That's what came to my mind when he was talking through that situation. And Paul responding to these accusations like Jesus, because when the accusations were being thrown out, this didn't turn into a fist fight in the temple. Paul didn't immediately jump to his own defense. We don't see him say anything in response to these accusations until he's pulled away, and we can do so in a calm manner, and he's collected. So in chapter 22, we get Paul's defense, and before I dive into his defense, I want to make sure that we have the full understanding of the scene and the situation that we're in. Does anybody remember what Paul was accused of before he got pulled out of there? It's an open question. If anybody remembers, feel free to. Huh? Blasphemy? Well, yeah, a little bit. Yeah. He was teaching people, you don't have to obey the law of Moses. There's this new covenant. There's these new laws we're following. The last thing that he was accused of that was just the final thing that really caused the people to riot was this guy brought a Gentile into the temple. All of a sudden, his life's on the line. He's accused of ministering to Gentiles, converting them to the way, ignoring the Jewish Mosaic laws, and bringing a Gentile into the inner court. We saw that in chapter 21, verses 27 and 28. When the 7 days were nearly over, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us! This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place. And besides, he brought a Gentile into the temple and defiled this holy place." So why does that start a riot? It's sacred ground. I mean, if I brought one of my atheist friends to church, you would all do the same thing, right? Oh, no, we don't. But the riot starts because the Jews hate the Gentiles. Simple. Todd told us last week, when you first enter the temple, that first area, which he equated to being like our church parking lot, anybody can be there. That's fine. That's safe space. Anybody's allowed to be there. You're in my parking lot. I don't care. But as you walk in through the front door, there is a sign there that basically says, "No Gentiles beyond this point." Most Jews at this point are still opposed to the disciples' teachings. Remember, we have Judaism and we have the way. Sometimes when we read stories and we're talking about Jews, we're like, oh, these are the chosen people. These are the people who become Christians. Not all of them. They're especially opposed to these teachings when they apply to everybody. The riot starts at the mention that Paul brought in a Gentile. Paul is vilified because he's spending his time with those people. Phil often talks to us about our circles of influence, who we surround ourselves with, who sees and hears and experiences us living on mission. How many of us choose to avoid being around those people, whoever those people are to you? We're seeing here what we would equate today to racism and segregation. I can't believe you brought one of those people into our space. How dare you? Hasn't gone away, unfortunately. It's still a thing. Everybody has somebody we consider those people. There are certain countries on the planet right now where if I was to come up here and say, I feel God's calling me to go to this place and bring the word of Jesus, the missional part of you would be like, that's amazing. That's great to hear God's doing that. The human side of you would be like, he's going to get himself killed. That's not a safe place to go. He's going to end up in jail. He's going to end up dead. He shouldn't be going to those people. There's places here in our own country where if I felt God calling me to go live on mission in a certain place, I'd be like, you want me to go live around those people? If I woke up and God's like, you're going to move down to Florida with your cousins and live on mission there. You mean the place with all those Florida Man headlines? You want me to live on mission around those people? That's a lighthearted version of it. But at this point, the crowd's rioting. Paul is bound, and he's under guard. And what is he asked to do? Speak to the people. He wants to address the crowd. Acts 21, verse 39, Paul answered, I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, citizen of no ordinary city. Please let me speak to the people. What does he use this opportunity to do? He shares his testimony. This is what we see happen. He addresses the guard in Greek, and then he addresses the crowd in Aramaic. When he starts off, the first thing he says, verse 1, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. Paul starts what he's saying the same way that Stephen did in his trial. If we go back and look at when Stephen was martyred, Acts chapter 7, verse 2, Stephen, first thing he says, to this he replied, brothers and fathers, listen to me. Paul says he was born in Tarsus, which happens to be the third largest educational center in the ancient world. We don't hear so much about Tarsus. We have Athens in Greece, we have Alexandria in Egypt, and then you have Tarsus. It's not a bad place to be. It's a well-respected area. He says he was raised in Jerusalem. I was born in Tarsus. Really, that's a big deal. And I was raised right here in Jerusalem. It's a big deal. I studied under Gamaliel, who was a renowned Jewish rabbi. We read that, and it's like, cool, Gamaliel. That'd be like me being up here and be like, really glad to be here. Hey, you guys know I grew up in this area, and then I got to go and study under Billy Graham. When he says, I studied under Gamaliel, everybody knows who that is. He was well-renowned, well-respected in that time. In verse 3, I was just as zealous for God as you are today. In that piece, he's essentially saying, I understand why you want to kill me. You believe you're serving God by doing that. I used to do the same thing. We have to remember that when Paul was Saul, he was a Jew working on behalf of Jewish leaders to stop the spread of this new gospel. So this whole first part, as he's introducing himself to the crowd, is all trying to give himself some credibility so that they'll listen to him. When we get to verse 6, about noon as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. That's another one of those little parts from his testimony that's easy to just kind of gloss over. I was on the road at noon. Cool. Does it mean a whole lot to us now at this point in time? If you're on the road at noon, that means whatever work you're doing is of the utmost importance. You're on an urgent mission. It cannot wait. They don't have clocks. This doesn't mean that he was on the road like at 12 o'clock. That's just our best way to understand it. Noon for them is sun's at the highest point. It is the hottest part of the day. this is the time when things usually kind of shut down for a little bit. People try to find some shade, cool off, rest, whatever. You're only on the road at noon if whatever you're doing can't wait. And right now he's on the road to Damascus to continue what he feels his mission is, to persecute, imprison, and kill followers of Jesus. Verses 6 through 21, he recounts this encounter that he has. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground, and I heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? If you have a red letter Bible, these words are in red to designate that this is Jesus speaking to him. Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. He replied, my companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. So he has this encounter with Jesus. And it's instantly, like he knew who was talking to him. He didn't have any doubt. It was, this is Lord speaking to me. Okay, what do you need me to do? That place you're going, you're still going to go there. You're going to do something different, though. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus, because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all the people of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name. When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. We get Paul's testimony. When he met Jesus, when he accepted Jesus must be who he was saying he was, and decided to do something different with his life. In verse 1, when he starts to share, when we read this, we can identify it as his testimony. What does Paul call it? He calls it his defense. 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. That's what our testimony is. Verse 18, quick, God said, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Paul is told that unbelievers are not going to accept his story. What happens today when you attempt to share your testimony with somebody who doesn't believe? Has anybody ever shared their testimony and had somebody be like, that's amazing, your God must be the real deal? If you have, fantastic. That's awesome. Keep doing it. I haven't had that happen. Usually, when I give my testimony, somebody who doesn't believe is like, there's a reasonable explanation for why that happened. Why do we get that kind of response? 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. When we're being saved, we can recognize what's happening. God orders Paul to leave Jerusalem. What does Paul want to do? Paul wants to stay. He tells God in verses 19 through 20, but these people know me. So my testimony should really resonate with them. They know that I went from synagogue to synagogue. They saw me do what I do. If I go to these same people and be like, I was wrong, it's going to mean something. God said again to leave. God tells Paul, no, I want you to go tell those people instead. Verses 21 and 22, then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. And the crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live. They listened up until he said what? Gentiles. Here's the magic word again. They listened to everything he said up until the Lord said he was going to send me to the Gentiles. They reignite. Why do they reignite at that point? The idea that God would send a Jew to save those people was repulsive. When we really look at what's happening, it's amazing that this crowd listened to Paul for as long as they did. We got to think, so he's at the Temple Mount during a holiday time. It is full. People have made a pilgrimage to get there. He's talking through his testimony, and he talks about meeting Jesus, who all these Jewish people understand is dead. We got rid of him. He talks about meeting Jesus on the road, Jesus speaking to him from heaven. He's talking to Jesus as Jesus being who he said he was to a crowd of people that very likely included folks who were outside the gates demanding for him to be crucified. But they listened to that part. He talks about being there while Stephen is being killed, and he refers to Stephen as a martyr. You only refer to somebody as a martyr if they died for the same thing you believe in. If you don't believe in what they believe, you don't see them as a martyr. You see them as a crazy person. He's talking about Stephen as a martyr to a group of people that very likely contained folks who were there, who took part in the stoning of Stephen. Paul probably held some of their coats while they did it. But they listened to him through that part. They erupted at the mention of bringing salvation to the Gentiles. They'll listen to everything else until he's like, I went to save the Gentiles. Nope, you lost me. I'm out. No way. No way. From his calling into ministry, Paul believed that the Jews of Jerusalem would appreciate his testimony, and through his testimony, perhaps some of them would actually see where he was coming from. Maybe he could get some of them to think, oh, you know what? Yeah, I remember all the stuff Paul did. I was there as he did some of this, and if he is saying, well, maybe there's something to it. Paul has been waiting and hoping and wanting the chance to speak to his target demographic since he was saved. And at first, God's like, no, you're going to go. I'm sending you far away. He finally gets the opportunity he has his desired captive audience in front of him. He gets his opportunity to share something with them, and he shares his testimony. Now, the thing about a testimony is if you're a Christ follower, if you've accepted, everybody then has a testimony. It might not be as earth-shattering as Paul's. Mine's definitely not. I grew up going to a Catholic church. Didn't have any relationship with God, didn't have any relationship with Jesus. I accepted there was a God. That's about as far as it went. When I was 12 or 13, my family started going to a Pentecostal church that was meeting at the Maple Grove Community Center at the time. And it was wild. Walk in there and pastors up front playing a guitar, and the songs sound like music I would actually listen to. The pastor talked and shared things, and people would actually respond, laugh, or whatever. It seemed like people enjoyed being there. It's a wild concept. I joined the youth group, and when I was 14, still wasn't there yet. When I was 14, the youth group was going to go to this winter camp out in Wisconsin in February. Never been to something like that, so I was, sure, I'll go. So 10 of us piled into one of those big passenger vans, and we took off for Wisconsin. I don't know what time it was. I know it was dark. I was sitting in like the back left corner seat of this passenger van, and I had all the luggage. I was in the last row, so the luggage was right behind me, and I'm just sitting there looking out the window, and all of a sudden I look down, and my Bible is in my lap. Which had somehow fallen out of all the luggage behind me, which I remember thinking was weird. So because, I'm 14 and I don't have a seatbelt on, so I take my Bible and I shove it back into all the luggage where it's supposed to be, and I turn around just in time to see that there's a white sedan sideways in our lane, and we T-boned it. There were 4 teenagers in that car. 2 of them died on impact. 1 of them died on the way to the hospital. The one that survived is a quadriplegic. In this van that I'm in, the luggage, which is all behind me, which I'm not a physics expert, but when you're going and then come to a sudden stop, stuff should shoot that way. I know that I shot that way. Scenes from the crash site show that our back doors flew open and all the luggage shot out backwards. Still haven't figured that one out. If anyone here is better at physics than me, please enlighten me to how that happened. The window that I was sitting next to was the only window in that entire van that didn't break. I was half the size I am now when I was 14. I was a tiny kid. Was not wearing a seatbelt. I didn't leave my seat. The girl sitting next to me wasn't wearing her seatbelt. She ended up on the floor with the bench in front of us down on her leg, broke it in like 7 places. This accident had 14 people involved. 3 people died. 1 person's a quadriplegic. Several people in my van needed major surgeries. I walked away from it. Nothing. I mean, I'm 14, so when the ambulance and stuff shows up, I get neck brace on, put on a board, hauled to the hospital. They ask me if anything's wrong. I'm like, I think I have a little cut on my knee. They went to cut my jeans, and I was like, you can't cut my pants. My mom will be so mad. Right, because that's what they're worried about right now. Get to the hospital. They do x-rays, everything. I'm fine. Nothing. I can still remember sitting in the hospital and I was just sitting there being like, there's got to be a reason. I could remember sitting there and being like, I don't really know who you are. I don't know why I got to just walk away from this. I'm yours. I've been doing ministry since, in some capacity. I've been sharing my testimony for now almost 20 years, because I'll be 34 in September. Never once has sharing my testimony just resulted in like an immediate conversion. That's what Paul takes his time to do, is share his testimony with everybody. And the thing about our testimony is our testimonies are personal, but they're not meant to be confidential. Our testimony is our defense for the joy that lives in us. Sharing our testimony opens us up. It reveals something about us, and it lets people in to what's a major moment in our lives. So reflecting back to verse 18, when God says, quick, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Paul's being told unbelievers aren't going to They're not going to accept your testimony. I have friends, I've had coworkers who don't believe what I believe. They ask me why do I share my testimony, and that's when I get the, wow. You probably walked away because you guys weren't going that fast. Okay, well, people died though, so we were going fast enough for it to be a serious accident. I've had people, oh, well, you just got lucky. You just picked the right seat in the van, I guess. I'm not that lucky. When we share our testimony in contrast with people we consider to be brothers and sisters, like when I stand up here this morning, it's like, I'm going to share a piece of my testimony. I can choose to do that because this is a safe place. When people share their testimonies and we're fellow believers, we congratulate them on their testimony, and we feel like privileged that we get this glimpse into how God acted in somebody's life. And we find it really cool. And Paul was probably hoping for the same. Oh, if I could just tell these people what you did to me, they would be so blown away. It would be so amazing. Instead, the hatred for the people he served and the message that he brought was so intense. Instead of saying, oh, look at this awesome thing that God just saw was doing this, and God appeared to him, a light so bright that he was blinded by it, and he heard Jesus, that's incredible. Instead of getting that reaction, he gets to experience the crowd saying, take him away. He's not even fit to live. I have two takeaways from this portion. First, I think we need to check ourselves. Who do we see as those people? And why do we see them that way? Now, I'm not going to stand up here and be like, oh, everybody's got a particular group of people you don't like. I'm not saying that. I'm saying everybody's got somebody, some person in their life that it's like, no, not that person. Coworker who just completely drives you insane. God, I know you want me to reach everybody, but everybody doesn't include that person, right? Maybe it's a family member who drives you insane. I'm going to go see this person. I'm just going to be on my best behavior. I don't want this topic of conversation. Nope. We're just going to get through it. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a friend, where it's like, no, I don't, I'm fine being around this person, but I don't need to live on mission around that person. I don't think so. Instead of focusing on, well, this is how I see this person, maybe we need to start asking, well, how does God see this person? And I don't mean like how you want to believe God looks at that person. We have to be careful, because if you find that your God never disagrees with you, you might just be worshiping an idealized version of yourself. So really think about, when you look at that person, okay, well, how does God see this person? When we're shining the light of scriptures on them, how does God see this person? And how do I stop thinking of him or her as one of those people we're not meant to reach, and start accepting every single person as one of God's people? My second takeaway is, be ready to share your testimony. We can share Bible stories and verses all we want, but the question's always going to come back, well, how do you know? As a Christian, we may be the only Bible some unbelievers ever read. I definitely know I've got people in my life, in my circles of influence, who will probably never sit down and read the story of Adam or Noah or Moses or Job, Matthew, Luke, or Paul. But these people will look at our stories. I get asked a lot why I have faith-based tattoos, a big cross on one arm and a Bible verse on the other. Wouldn't believe the amount of times I end up in random conversations because somebody sees that, asks about it. Opportunities to share my testimony, because the hope's always that they might not go read all of these stories themselves, but maybe if I'm really lucky, my story will help send them towards the guy who wrote all the other ones.